Hello everyone. In this video, I'll go over some tips when filling out rental applications and information on housing laws. In this video, I'll go over rental applications, the leasing process, security deposits, and some housing laws. Let's go over what landlords are looking for in applicants. Most importantly, they want to see that you can afford the rent, have consistent employment, and a consistent rental history. Landlords might also want to know the reasons as to why you left previous rentals. They might also want to see some landlord and character references before they rent to you. When filling out a housing application, treat it like a job application. Fill it out completely and find creative ways to let your landlord know about past situations. That is, if you have any. For example, some good reasons for leaving previous rental opportunities can be because you want to live closer to work, you want to live closer to better schools, or you just want to live closer to family. These are better reasons compared to saying that you could not afford your previous rent or you didn't get along with your neighbors. Provide the requested information and do not give the landlord reasons to question your application. Unanswered questions can raise red flags. Now, I'll go over what not to do when filling out an application. First off, do not use slang. This can be seen as unprofessional. Also, do not leave items blank, unless you have a legitimate reason such as identity theft. You can let the landlord know that you'll provide that information if you want to follow through with the application. Be honest when filling out the application because you can lose out on this housing opportunity if the landlord catches you lying. Take your time as well to fill out the application as accurately as possible. So what is a lease? A lease is a rental agreement contract that establishes all the terms of the agreement and that lasts for a predetermined length of time. For example, it could be month to month, 6 months, or a year. It is in your best interest to have a lease even if you're renting a room. Leases can be informal. For example, they could be written on binder paper. A lease is a legally binding contract, so it is extremely important to read through the entire contract. Here are some questions that you should ask when signing a lease. When is the rent due? Where do I pay my rent? What forms of payment do you accept? And if the landlord requires cash, always ask for a receipt. Are there any penalties for late payments, and what are they? Here are some more questions you can ask. Landlords usually require tenants to pay a security deposit at the beginning of the tenancy. At move-out, the landlord can use a security deposit to cover expenses beyond normal wear and tear, including damages to the unit, needed repairs, cleaning services, unpaid rent, etc. However, security deposits cannot exceed 2 times the rent. For example, if your rent is $1,500, the security deposit cannot be more than $3,000. The security deposit can sometimes be called last month's rent or cleaning deposit. A holding deposit can be requested by a landlord to reserve a unit for a prospective tenant before a lease has been signed. When a holding deposit is requested, don't pay in cash. Also, get a receipt for any money paid. Before paying a holding deposit, make sure to get a written holding deposit agreement as well. If you decide to rent the unit, the holding deposit needs to be returned or applied to your security deposit. The landlord must return the entire holding deposit if you have been denied the unit, but if you turn down the unit, then the landlord can keep the holding deposit. Now, let's go over the Federal Fair Housing Act. This act prohibits discrimination based on the following protected classes that include color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and disability. Landlords cannot state preferences or refuse to rent housing the above characteristics or protected classes. One exception is if the landlord is renting out rooms in a house that they themselves occupy. Then they can state preferences. The Fair Employment and Housing Act provides additional protection for harassment or discrimination in housing for the following protected classes: race, color, national origin, religion, gender identity and gender expression, which includes pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding, or any related medical conditions, sexual orientation, marital status, or familial status, source of income as long as it is legal. The Fair Employment and Housing Act requires housing providers to make reasonable accommodations to permit people with disabilities to use and enjoy a dwelling, and allow them to make reasonable modifications to the premises. What counts as a legal source of income? According to the SB 329, source of income means lawful, verifiable income paid directly to a tenant or to a representative of a tenant, or paid to a housing owner or landlord on behalf of a tenant, including federal, state, or local public assistance, and federal, state, or local housing subsidies, including but not limited to federal housing assistance vouchers issued under Section 8 of the United States Housing Act of 1937. You can pause the video to read the full description, but I will try to summarize it here for you. So source of income is any verifiable income paid directly to a tenant or representative or paid to a housing owner or landlord on behalf of a tenant. So for example, the income from a job. Source of income also includes the total amount of aid you receive from a federal Department of Housing via a voucher. Now, let's talk about medical prescriptions. There are no protections for marijuana, even if you have a medical marijuana card. Marijuana usage can be denied by the landlord even if it is prescribed for medical reasons. A policy can be included in the lease as a clause that you must abide by upon signing the lease, which makes the state law irrelevant. Landlords can ban smoking on the premises, including marijuana, tobacco, vapes, etc. Landlords restrict smoking and possession of marijuana products on the property to protect you and your neighbors, and the value of the property. Some housing properties do not allow pets on the property, unless it is a service animal. For example, a service dog that is trained to perform tasks for an individual with a disability cannot be denied by the landlord. Service dogs and animals are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act. These animals are considered medical tools, not pets, so you cannot be charged pet fees, and they must be allowed regardless of the breed, age, and weight of the dog. Landlords can only be asked if it is a service dog required due to a disability and ask about the work or task the dog has been trained to do. However, they cannot ask about the specific disability or for any type of identification or certification documents for the dog. Emotional support animals are animals that alleviate a symptom or affect a person's disability. Emotional support animals are animals that alleviate a symptom or affect a person's disability. However, they are not covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and a letter from a doctor is not sufficient for an animal to be considered a service animal. Now, we'll go over some examples of discrimination. One example of discrimination is stating prefer married couples, or we don't accept children on this property. However, there could be an exception if the people renting out the room or rooms lives on the property as well. Another exception is if all the renters in the house are the same gender. For example, if 3 women are renting a unit, then they could state that they are only looking for female renters. Another example of discrimination is denying someone an application based on a protected class. An example of this is only giving out applications to married couples. An exception to this is if the owner of the property lives within the home and there is no more than one person renting the unit. Another example of discrimination is stating that a unit has been rented to one person but tells another that it is still available. The 2+1 occupancy guideline is a guideline, not a law, designed to help families, not hinder families from obtaining housing. This is a guideline landlords often use to state that a unit can only have 2 people per bedroom plus 1 extra person for the living room. There are actual laws regarding occupancy that are determined by square footage and are governed by the city and county ordinances. Now, I'll go over what is not considered discrimination. It is not considered discrimination if a landlord denies you an application because you do not meet the rental criteria. An example of this is if the landlord requires applicants to make 2 times the rent and you do not. Landlords cannot discriminate against Section 8 vouchers as a source of income. However, they can require applicants to make 2 to 3 times the rent in order to deny applicants with Section 8 vouchers, in which their source of income is not enough to satisfy the required income limit. Here's some questions that landlords are allowed to ask you. How many people will be living in the unit? How many adults will be applying for the unit? What is your income and employment information? And they could ask for a social security number or tax ID number for the purpose of running a credit check. Some questions that landlords cannot ask you are if you're married or single, if you have a boyfriend, if you have kids, if you're pregnant, if you're a U.S. citizen. Landlords cannot ask any questions about your race, age, background, religious beliefs, sexual orientation, or if you have a disability or medical condition. The ultimate goal is to secure housing. Looking for housing can be difficult, and it takes time, a lot of energy, and determination. But don't give up. Set realistic goals for yourself each week for your housing search. We are also here to help. Here's some local housing resources with descriptions on the services they offer. And here are a couple more housing resources you can use. Thank you for watching.